Hello there and welcome back to the channel. This is Nerdworld and we're going to look at today a vessel from Division 14 of Starfleet, or possibly the Federation. I think this is more of a general Federation ship. I got the impression that Division 14 was an autonomous agency, possibly separate to Starfleet, but that's a different video discussion. This ship is the so-called Osler type. The classification of the vessel actually is unknown. It may end up being the Osler class, as this vessel's designation was NX, which was Naval Experimental, of course. So it may have been, much like the NX-01 or the USS Defiant, have been an advanced prototype starship. It was first seen in Lower Decks, Much Ado About Boimler. And let's get into the story of this ship, the lore, and what we know about it. Before we get started, please like, share, subscribe, and comment down below. And let's get started. The Osler type vessel was a type of ship, as I said, it was operated by Division 14. Division 14's particular area of specialty was a subdivision of Starfleet, which was in existence to solve dangerous or hazardous or particularly specialized scientific and medical issues. This ship was such a vessel attached to the agency whose specialization was medical anomalies. The Osler itself, the original prototype of this line of starship, had spent several months traveling Federation space, picking up critically injured or damaged service personnel from the Federation who had undergone unusual medical or scientific alterations and were in need of specialist care. The ultimate destination of this ship was a planet simply known as the Farm, which was a Federation medical recuperation center where officers were sent to get the care they needed, whether that be long-term or short-term, for recovery and treatment. If it was going to be long-term, basically this was practically a retirement home for them. It was designed to accommodate for the special needs of officers who had unconventionally become ill, such as a transporter accident, some kind of genetic mutation, or whatever. The Osler type starship itself is a little vague in its exact capabilities. We know that it's smaller than a California class starship, but then again it didn't really need to be. It's not got the same facilities on board it as other Federation-seen hospital ships such as the Olympic class. This vessel seems to lean more towards being a large interstellar ambulance rather than being an actual mobile hospital unit. Although it likely has fairly impressive medical facilities, it was more for short-term treatment and delivery of personnel, even though it had spent several months traveling space. It was a specialist craft probably designed to alleviate some of the burden on the larger hospital ships in Starfleet, which were likely up until this point also having to double for this duty, which was taking them away from possibly more pressing matters of planet-wide emergencies or Federation-wide viruses or other such things they may have needed their facilities and specialist personnel to deal with. As a result, these ships that could be operated by a skeleton crew were created to fill that void. At least that's my perception. Division 14, again being a specialist agency, requires specialist ships. The vessel is likely fast, but its exact maximum warp is unknown. It's also known to have shields, but its exact defensive capabilities are unknown. We can safely assume that it's got phasers, but as for whether or not it actually packs anything with more punch, such as a photon torpedo, speculation only. I doubt it. I would imagine they would reserve the internal space of this ship for medical and scientific equipment and not really requiring such a vessel to carry such weapons. Although the vessel does have a fairly fearsome appearance, this is as much likely psychological as anything to basically give off the impression that the ship is perhaps a little meaner than it really is. It also more likely relies on stealth and speed to avoid confrontation rather than try to get in it. Bear in mind, this ship is basically an ambulance, not a tank. So, although space is dangerous and it probably did have phasers for some level of defense, it probably was quite limited. Side notes about the vessel: the name Osler itself is named after a Canadian field physician from the 24th century perspective, a very long time ago. As is the tradition with many medical ships within the Federation, they are named after historical medical figures, such as the Pasteur and other such vessels. So that is the Osler type. There really isn't much lore in it. It's again something I've commented on before. A lot of New Trek it doesn't give you much information on the ships. There isn't as much of a detailed breakdown. It's quite famously that the Enterprise is the most detailed ship we know about. That's in the NX-01 Enterprise, probably followed by the Enterprise D, and then probably the E. And even Voyager is a little sporadic in its lore, which I may actually uncover one day, because there are certain things about Voyager that were never explored but are included in the design specifications. But well, for example, it has a second warp core, which is just never mentioned. And there are theories as to why, which I'll go into that one day. The ship had 2 warp cores. Intrepid class starships have 2 warp cores, but Voyager was launched early, so there's a theory that it didn't have its second core installed, and that's why Voyager, when it lost its main warp core, had to really go out of its way to get it back, because it didn't have a redundancy like others of the class. It's the same with certain other features of the ship. They just weren't finished, so it didn't have them. Anyway, off topic. As I said, that's the Osler type. Unfortunately, the lore is a little dry on this ship. Unfortunately, because I really love the design. It's almost Imperial. It looks kind of Star Wars, but I do kind of like it. It's got something of a Star Wars, or even a bit of a Warhammer feel to it. But it's a beautiful ship, and it did a very vital role within the Federation, in my opinion. I can understand why an organization like the Federation and Starfleet would create such specialist ships, but let me know what you think in the comments below. And do we hope to see more of this vessel? Because I do. I would like to see more of it. I'm not the biggest Lower Decks fan, but I'm not the biggest animated Trek fan in general. I would like to see more of this vessel, though, because it was one of the things that stood out to me as a fairly cool looking starship. Again, more starship porn from modern Trek, which is something I am actually enjoying about modern Trek. And this is one of the better ship designs. It's also very distinctive, lacking a saucer section, but this again is not unusual for medical starships within Starfleet. Many medical ships, again referencing the Olympic class USS Pasteur, use a spherical hull section, arcing back to more archaic Starfleet designs. If you notice in early Starfleet, and even pre-Starfleet, the vessels are quite different. The kind of ships the warp ships Earth was building in the late 21st century into the early 22nd century, right through to the mid, it wasn't until you got to the Intrepid type and then later the NX class where you started to see saucer sections being fairly common. Many ships before them had different designs, such as the Warp Delta, for example, or the Emmet class. Such vessels were more of a wedge shape, and then you had Romulan War era vessels that were basically cylindrical. So there is this arcing back, and then the Daedalus class, which is clearly what the Olympic class is based on with the spherical hull. It seems to me, as a fan, actually, going off into this little tangent, is my fan theory on this, is we see saucer-shaped vessels, so ships like the Kirk ship, like Picard's ship, and even Voyager. We see this basic hull configuration of a drive section with the nacelles stuck on, and then the command section put on the other side. So basically you've got a 3-component ship, and you've got all your major engineering stuff in the engineering hull, obviously, and propulsion systems, and then the drive systems, the command systems in the other section, crew quarters. And it's a way of segregating the vessel for safety and also for organizing it in a scientific, logical way, a linear front, middle, back kind of design. And that's what Starfleet utilized for their vessels of exploration. But then when you go into vessels that are more for different tasks, see, Starfleet evolved with these ships down this line, and then it experimented with other designs, which fell into roles which were more suitable to their particular hull configuration. For example, if you squint hard enough, we know that the Warp Delta from the 22nd century is a type of patrol vessel. You kind of squint, you can see the general hull profile of a Defiant class in there. In that the Defiant class in and of itself, again, you got to squint a little bit, but is basically a Delta design in and of itself. So there's a continuity of combat vessels being flat, broad, and a little bit pointy for Starfleet. And then you've got ships that are more specialized scientific or medical vessels which have the spherical hull. So those design lineage started at least in the early 22nd century, probably in the early 21st, in the late 21st rather. And as Starfleet evolved, it would go down the line of, right, vessels of exploration are going to have the saucer design, but combat ships are going to have this more wedge-shaped sort of wing-like design. And then dedicated scientific vessels will have this more rounded feel, things like that. So you start to see a continuity of design lineage within certain specifications of Starship. Now there are outliers to this, like the Akira class, which is a combat vessel but looks a lot more like the NX class, and things of that nature. The Oberth class, which is also a dedicated science vessel, which also still has more in common with a regular Starfleet ship than a dedicated science vessel or medical ship. But anyway, after that little tangent, I should have ended this video a while ago. That does bring us to the end of this video. If you made it all the way to the end, let me know in the comments below what you think about Starfleet design lineages of Starfleet. If you think I'm on, if you agree with me or you disagree, tell me in the comments. Let's have a discussion. And with that said, like, share, subscribe, comment down below, and bye-bye.